This is a bit of a disclaimer. Even though I'm showing you the workflow and how to make recolors in Blender, I really can't recommend you learn it because it's so much more of a hassle than just figuring out how to use other programs. But the only reason why I figured it out is because I don't like other programs. I gave programs like Krita a try. I tried using my art program, Medibang. I tried using Photoshop. Photoshop's a hassle in itself, in my opinion. I've never been well acquainted with Photoshop, so it's probably just a me thing. Online photo editor, Photopea. That one's almost good if it had a faster way to export images. The way that it works is you export an image, it saves it to your downloads, and as you'll see in the live photo texture editor later, previewing, like getting the file from your downloads over to the location where your recolor is just a hassle. There's always some sort of caveat, it seems, with gradient maps, like finding a program that has gradient maps. And I know there's also add-ons for programs like Paint.net, but they're not the same. Blender's color ramp tool, aka the gradient map tool, is just, it's so easy to understand for my brain that it's worth the extra hassle to set up and use. So I hope this video is helpful for people like me who don't like other photo editing programs but know enough about Blender to use it for this unconventional way. I guess let me know if you're confused about anything. I'll do my best to help out. I'm not super great at making tutorial videos. Most of them are unscripted, so they end up being kind of long. But anyways, enjoy. So the first thing you'll want to do when wanting to make recolors in Blender is set up your scene appropriately. You'll want to switch our rendering engine to cycles because Eevee does not support baking, and we'll want to bake our texture when we're done because that's the only way we can export it. We will want to make sure that we have the import images as planes add-ons enabled. That way we can obviously import our texture into Blender without having to worry about squashing and stretching, because some textures have different resolutions. You can't always rely on the default plane to be the right dimensions. The next thing we want to do is come over to our shader editor and go to our world. This is an important step if you want your textures to look exactly the same as they would in an image editor after you bake them. So we were going to start by duplicating this background node here, adding in a mix shader, and plugging these into it with a light path camera ray as the factor. What this essentially does, it's hard to see when I don't have anything in the scene, so I'm just going to import a cube real quick just to show you what it does. Base color blue. So this is a part of the setup, not the cube, but this next part. We want to come over here to our viewport shading options and tick both scene lights and scene world. That way, when we edit the world, we can see it changing in our viewport. So what this essentially allows us to do is control the background color, which is, if you do it right, like this, will be the bottom one. I leave that one alone because it's just Blender's default color, and I'm already used to it, and it looks great. So, but this other one will let us control how bright our objects are. Right now, they're pretty dark because this color is dark. If we wanted to get 1-to-1 with how it looks in image texture, we'll want to crank it all the way to white. And then, after that, we want to come down to our color management and our render properties, change AGX to standard. And this cube was just for demonstration purposes, because as you can see, we can make it bright and turn this down. You'll see that the color is now exactly the color that we told it to be, and it's not being influenced by anything else. Let's get rid of this. And with that, we are now ready to start setting up our textures. So for this example, I'm going to set up a scene for recoloring Mario. So I'm going to import his texture as a plane. We will start with the overalls, because why not? So when we first import the texture, the material it gives us is something we're going to want to change immediately. Principled BSDF is not necessary here. We don't need all those settings. So we're going to get a diffused BSDF, and we're just going to plug everything together. So now we have a texture exactly like you would see it in the photo editor. But we obviously want to recolor each element of this texture individually. So we have to get image layers, just like a photo editor. So I've already got all of Mario's stuff separated here. There's going to be a link in the description that you can follow to find a whole bunch of recolor templates made by different people in the community. Very, very gracious of them to give us their assets that they made, because some of these characters are pretty complicated. But they're awesome for that. Feel free to use them for whatever you want to do. But my base texture here for Mario is just the overalls. So I'm going to start layering this stuff on top of it. So let's start with the threading. And basically the way we are going to be recoloring these layers is through Blender's version of a gradient map. So that's called a color ramp. So when we stick the color of the layer into the color ramp, well, that's not a very good example. I should probably just do it here. When we stick the color ramp, when we stick the image texture into the color ramp, you can see it turns black and white according to these handles. And when you change the handles color, the color changes. Very, very versatile tool. It's probably the best way to make recolors for anything. You get so much control over every little part. Once you get a handle on how gradient maps work, you'll never want to go back to any other way, just because the results you get just look so good. But anyways, so now we need to layer this on top, and to do that we want a mix color node. We want to put the base layer on the A node, the A input, and we want to put the layer that goes on top in the B input. I know that's a little counterintuitive because you put the bottom layer on top and the top layer on bottom. I don't know why Blender's like that. Doesn't matter. But now we have a result like this, and that looks weird. And that is because our factor is
splitting it right down the middle. It's switching between this texture and this texture. So basically, if we want to properly layer, we want to use the factor as our, or sorry, we want to use the alpha as our factor. That way, only the parts that are opaque in our threads layer will layer on top of the overalls layer. So now I can tweak the overalls base layer without affecting the threads. We're gonna do this for every layer we have. So I have 2 button layers and a hair layer left. For the sake of organization, I'm going to select some of these. I'm going to do Shift P to frame them, and I'm going to name them accordingly. So this is the overalls. This is the threading. And we're going to keep duplicating them until we're done. So threading, overalls, buttons, just mix them together like that. Rename, buttons, duplicate, open, big button, result, and the hair. And then I'm going to grab everything and I'm going to move the last mix color node in front of our diffuse. And now we have a pure black and white texture that we can change to our liking. We can change each individual aspect depending on what we want to recolor or what we don't want to recolor. For example, the hair. Most of the time you're not going to want to be recoloring the hair. But there may be an instance where you might want to recolor the hair. Like if you're trying to make a recolor based on the original Super Mario Bros. NES sprite. His hair would be like a weird olive color. But for the most part, you don't want to change the hair color. So I'm going to leave the color ramp here, but I'm going to take the color from the image texture and plug it into B. That way I can always plug this back into B if I wanted to, but most of the time I'm not going to want. Most of the time I'm not going to want to do that. So yeah, keep the option there just in case you need it. So this is this texture setup, and I chose the overall texture first because it has less parts. So let's move on to the next texture. I'm going to move this one aside to make room for the base of the body A texture. So for this texture, I actually have a base layer. So this, what I mean by that is the base layer is not going to be a texture that I recolor. It's simply there because there's many other aspects of the texture I don't want to recolor. For example, I don't want to recolor his hair. I don't want to recolor his eyebrows or mustache. I don't want to recolor his skin. I don't want to recolor his teeth. I don't want to recolor his mouth. That's a lot of things that I don't want to recolor and would basically just be wasted effort layering them on top of everything else we already have. So I'm just going to have a base layer here. So let's go ahead and grab our first layer we want to put on top and kind of just do the same thing as we did last time, except now I'm not going to connect the base layer into a color ramp because I'm not recoloring anything in there anyway. Put that in B, put that in A, and alpha in here. If I preview this, you'll see the shoe is now black. It's been turned to grayscale. This one has a bit more moving parts too, so it's going to take me a moment to get it all set up. There we go. This is probably just a me thing, but oh wow, I actually got it like right on target this time. Usually, I like to keep all of this in line and consistent so it doesn't move around too much when I switch between them. I find it a little disorientating having to constantly move around all the time. So, I recommend you do that as well. Don't have to. You can be as messy as you like with these nodes. I like to keep things organized though. Helps in the long run. So now that we're done with that setup, with layering all of our layers on top of each other appropriately and setting them up to be recolored, there's one more thing we want to do. We want to add one more image texture here. We want to create a new image, and we want to match the resolution and the name of the original texture of whatever the name is in Brawl Crate. That's what we want to name it. So Fit Mario Body A. Okay. And hit this little shield button. This protects it from ever being automatically deleted because it has no users, and that what that basically means is that when you reopen this blend file and you don't have this shield button ticked, Blender will delete anything that's not being used. So because this isn't plugged into anything or nothing is plugged into it, it's considered orphan data, and it'll be deleted. So just make sure you have that shield button ticked so you don't have to remake this file, or your bake doesn't get deleted, because when we bake our texture, it's going to get saved to this active texture. I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Fit Mario Body. Oh, I messed it up. It's okay. Body B. No, I didn't. I made this one Body B. What am I going on about? Alright. Now we've got our image textures set up to be edited. This next part is optional, but I will show it to you in case you want to have sort of like a live 3D preview of the model as you're making recolors. So let's go into, this is from a previous attempt, don't mind, previous attempt at the video, but go and open up your Fit Mario or Fit whatever character you're making recolor for, and open up in Brawl Crate and export their model file as a day file. We want to import it as day because we can then use the FBX converter from Autodesk to convert it to an FBX file, and from there we can import the FBX into Blender. And I specifically recommend FBX because day files are garbage, especially when exported from Brawl Crate. The short of it is FBX just retains more information and has proper bone rolls. Not really applicable for this, but it's a habit of mine. I recommend everybody use FBX. But anyways, enough of that. So for each of these objects are linked to a texture, obviously, and we want these objects to use these textures. And to do that, we just select our object, come over to our materials, and change them to use the same materials that are being used for the image planes. And they're going to look a little weird, but don't worry, we're going to fix that in a moment. Right after I assign everything. That's body A, that's body A. This is body B, this is body A. It's black for now, I'll fix that in a moment. Okay, and I don't need the eyes. So in order to fix this weird backface issue, you just come over to the Material tab, you go to Viewport Display, and you change Alpha Blend to Opaque. I don't know why it imports as Alpha Blend, it doesn't make any sense. Oh yeah. The reason why the hair is black for me is, for some reason, my texture on the body A material is set to clip. I don't know if that's going to be the case for you, but if it is, if anything looks black when it shouldn't, just make sure that your extension mode is set to repeat instead of anything else, because Brawl likes to utilize repeating UVs when it doesn't really need to. Some Brawl models are just like that, I don't know why. But here is our 3D model preview now. So typically what I do from here is I have a second setup, or I have a second window here to look at my textures, and then I have another setup here to look at the model. That way I don't have to keep flicking back and forth. It's just more convenient this way. So the next thing we'll be getting into is how to actually use gradient maps.
Alright, on to figuring out how to actually use gradient maps to make recolors. I'm going to be recoloring Mario's overalls because they're like 3/4 of his design. It's easy to see. It's got highlights, noticeable highlights, and noticeable shadows. It's a good test subject. So, our gradient map is this color ramp node, and it's got some properties that we can change here. The two biggest things are going to be these handles. These are how you basically use a gradient map. The one on the right, this white, by default it's white. This one changes the brighter parts of your texture. You'll see that when I move the handle, the brighter parts become brighter and the darker parts aren't as affected. This is the most important handle right here. This basically tells the whole texture what color you want it to be. So I always start by changing this color to be the color that I want it to be. So for my first example, I'll probably do a purple. So this handle will be purple. This handle over here, I never move. Moving it is just not recommended. It just is too drastic, and there's never really a case where you need to make the shadows more harsher. However, I do change the color of this. My general guideline for changing this color is leave it very dark. You don't want to, you don't even want to do 0.1 value. 0.1 value is way too high. I usually stick to 0.05 or 0.025 depending on what how bright this color I want to be. This looks bright right now. It's to 0.025. But the thing is that I also always have saturation at 1. This brings back more of that value to the color, so I can get away with having some color in the shadows. So, the only other thing that we need to know right now is the interpolation modes. I always stick with linear, But if for some reason you want different contrast, different ways of getting contrast, ease has the most, cardinal has a bit less, linear is the default, it's what I always use, I don't really use the other ones, and B-spline has the least. I'm just going to be using linear for this, because I find that I could pretty much do anything I want with linear and always get the results that I need.
So now that I've gone over the basics of what the color ramp node is and how to use it, let's start by making an example recolor. For the first example, I'm going to be recoloring it purple. It's going to be it's going to start as a more basic color, but I'll evolve it using midtones. And then we'll move on to a white color, and then we'll move on to a darker black color. There's intricacies in those last two examples that I see people struggle with, and I understand why. Getting the colors right is tricky if you don't know what to look for and you don't know what you're looking at. So let's do this first example first, obviously. So this right color is the one we want to change to pretty much change the color of the whole thing. So I'm going to be doing this one purple. More of like a warmer purple, more like this. It's great. Saturation, typically between 0.8, typically between 0.75 and 0.9. I wouldn't go any above or below for like a normal recolor that has enough color to be brawl, but still represent the color you want. So in this example, let's just do let's stick with 0.85 for now, because we can always change it. We'll make it, that's a little bit too dark. 0.65, we'll stick with 0.5. And then what about 0.9? It's like, the thing about the saturation meter is it's almost exponential. Like 0.1 is way too much, but like 0.9 is like a pretty good range, and then you get like 0.25, which is pretty much almost devoid of all color. I mean, there is still some there, but it's so slight. So like it seems almost exponential. Like these values are more, they're less sensitive, and then right when you get to like 0.7, like these ranges are like quite varied. So I would stick between 0.75 and 0.9 for these saturation values. I'll probably stick with 0.85 for this example. So that's our primary color. Let's move on to the shadow color now. This is where things get fun, because we're going to be having two different colors, one for our primary color and one for the shadow color. As you can see right now, this is about kind of the result you would get from like just overlaying a color on top of an image layer in like GIMP or something. Being able to control two different colors is where, two or more different colors is where gradient maps is unique, and why it's so versatile. So I always crank the saturation up, the saturation of the shadow color up, because it helps keep that color dark. We don't want the shadow color to be too light, otherwise the shadows stop being shadows. So this is also another very sensitive value. Like 0.1 is going to be way too bright. I stick with 0.05 or 0.025, depending on the color of the primary. Oops, 0.05. I'm going to do 0.05 for now, and I know it looks too bright, but the closer you get your shadow color to the color of your primary, the darker it'll be. And I know that sounds weird, but that's just kind of how it gets. You see, like, this already looks much more coherent. Although I will admit it is still a bit too bright, so we'll do 0.025, because this is like this isn't like a bright purple. This is more of like a darker purple. Not like dark enough to be covered in the dark example, but still. So I think this looks pretty decent. 0.01. No, we'll leave it at 0.025. I like having that color right there. Maybe make it a little bit purpler, just so it blends a bit nicer. And the cool thing is, if you want to go back and forth to see how your changes are affecting, confirm your color first, reopen the window, hit 0, and then now you can just undo and redo until you get what you like. See? So this is with the color and this is without. So let's fine tune this a little bit. Okay, yeah, I can live with that. That's not too bad. Alright, so we have control over the shadow color and the midtones and the highlights color in this example. Obviously this color to the right is our shadow color, but right now this color right here is acting as both our midtones and our highlights. And the way we kind of separate those two is a little weird. It varies case by case. But basically we need another handle to control that new color, that midtone color. If you hit this plus button, a new handle will be created in the middle of these two other handles we have, and it will adopt the color of wherever it lands right in the middle. And this is important because this middle color is now our midtone color. We don't really want to change this color because we already have a nice example. We already have a nice result. But if I start moving my highlights color, you can see my highlights are removing. That's because this midtone is actually too close to the bright side to it's pretty much over encompassing all of our highlights still. And the solution is not to bring this handle closer, because you're bringing that middle color closer, which is making everything brighter. What we want to do instead is add more handles at these different intervals that inherit that color at its respective place. So I added a couple more handles and I deleted the other ones I don't need. So now when I drag my highlights over, you can see that it starts to have an effect now. It's not quite there yet, so I'm just going to add another handle and delete it. And this is looking a lot nicer. So I think if I add one more, it's going to be too much. Like, yeah, like this is starting to control some of our midtones now. So I'm going to undo that. So we're going to leave this handle the way it is. This midtone handle is basically what's controlling our, our midtones now. So now we can control our highlights. So if I wanted to make these highlights a bit more of like a red, like a pinkish, I could do that. And then let's do 0.75 on saturation. There we go. 0.7, there we go. See, now the lighter parts of our texture lean more towards pink, our midtones are more of a purple, and our shadows are more of a blue. And they all blend together pretty well. Like, this is how you really start making exotic colors. If you don't want to make exotic colors, then just leave the highlights and the midtones together. But even then, you can still get use out of separating the midtones and the highlights. So if I undo and go back to before I made this pink, I can still control the highlights to give it more color depth without changing the hue of my highlights. I could just drag the saturation down a bit. Let's do 0.65 and then make it a bit more subtle by dragging it further to the right. And you'll see that now it looks like there's a bit more wear on the color compared to before, where the colors are more solid. Now there's a bit more wear. Like it's faded a bit more. So that's how you control each 3 of those parts of the texture. Now, for this next example, we're gonna recolor his overalls to be white, or at least a shade of white, because in Brawl, no color is pure black or pure white. It's always a tint. It always has like a very slight blue tint, or a red tint, or pink tint. It just depends on what your palette is. So I'm just going to reset this color ramp real quick. So, for lighter colors, if you remember what I said previously about the saturation value of the rightmost handle, usually sticking at about 7.5 to 0.9, for lighter colors, you do want to go a little bit lower than that. I say that as I drag the saturation all the way up. That's just so I can get the right color that I want. I'm going to drag it back down. We're going to go like right here. So the saturation for this one, I'm just going to start at like 0.25, maybe a little bit more, just so I can see it. So now we have kind of a slate blue. It's still dark because the base texture is dark. So to make it brighter, I'm just going to drag this up, and you can see it's starting to become white. But my problem with this is that there's still too much contrast. There's still too much variation between the values of the lights and darks. So to bring them closer together, I'm going to change the shadow color. And again, before I mentioned that generally you want to keep the shadow color pretty dang dark, because at that point the shadows stop becoming shadows. But for a lighter color, it's okay for your shadows to be a little bit brighter. That way you can bring these values closer together so it's not so noisy. Because generally your goal with lighter colors is to reduce noise, because this to me is not very appealing. So to counteract that, let's start changing some values here. Again, I like to keep saturation pretty high for the shadow colors, even on white. I'm going to make this maybe more like a purplish blue. Like, oops. Maybe like that. Oops. And then instead of decreasing the saturation, because right now obviously it's taking on more color from the shadows, instead of decreasing the saturation for the shadow color, I'm just going to make the shadows a bit darker. That way I can still have my color. 0.05. Well, you know what? I might actually bring the saturation down just a little bit. 0.85. Like I do want to still have some saturation here. We'll do 0.9. And this color was still a bit saturated. Let's do 0.25. Now we're starting to get like white. 0.2. 0.05, 0.75. Still a bit too saturated. That's a bit too flat. It's color ramps are and gradient maps are pretty much just a big balancing game. That doesn't look too bad. I kind of like that. 0.6. There we go. So let's compare this back to when it was black. You can see that the colors blend much nicer now compared to before, because the values are closer together. So there's less, the shadows are less harsh, and that's basically the problem that I see most people have when they try and recolor things white, is that it's just too harsh on the shadows. It's like, this isn't perfect, but you know, I could be here all day tweaking this if I really wanted to. 4, 5. Yeah, I'll leave it like that for now. Not like I'm gonna do anything with it, but still, just an example. This is how I would do a more white color. So moving on to now a more black color. Reset the color ramp again. So black colors are a little different because generally when I make a recolor that has black in it, I don't touch the shadow color. Because the highlight and midtone color is already going to be fairly dark. In order for you to even have color on your shadow color, you have to increase the value, but because the other tones are already dark, you don't want to have this color be brighter than those colors. So you end up having to have such a low value for your shadow color that it hardly changes anything. So I typically don't bother changing the shadow colors on black colors. I did say before that for the right color, I usually leave the value all the way up, but for dark colors, that's not the case. Same goes for the saturation. The saturation is more like the white one, the light color. I typically go quite a bit lower because blacks are just supposed to be tinted. They're not supposed to be the full color. So let's start by doing just 0.5 as like a baseline, and let's just do another blue. This dark blue is nice. 0.5, that's a little bit too much for a tint. 0.35 will do just fine though. Blacks are pretty easy compared to the other two examples we covered, because I'm not going to be moving this right handle at all. The only thing I'm going to be doing is creating a couple handles here to control my midtones, and after that, all I'm going to do pretty much is just desaturate my highlights. I don't want my highlights to really look like highlights. I don't want them to literally be highlights, because if I let the highlights color be bright, then not only does that create more contrast, it creates more noise, but it also drags the color further away from black. It makes it more of a light color. So I don't touch the value from what the initial color was. Instead, what I do is I just turn the saturation further down. 0.25. That way you get more color depth, like I showed on the purple color, without needing to increase the value. And despite all that I just said, I'll probably increase the value just a little bit on here, just so you can see. There we go. Just so you can see the effects of the lower saturation a bit nicer. But yeah, if I remove the midtone value, you'll see the difference it makes. Like, this is more of a gray, and I would say this is a better, like, black. You could probably go further with it, though. Let me see if I can do that here. 0.5. This is at like 0.5 as well, I think. Yeah. And let's just make a couple of these. The most annoying thing about making color ramps, or making gradient maps, recolors, is getting this mid-tone position right, because you'll be tweaking a color and you realize, oh, well, I want the midtones to be different. I want the midtone to be in like a different spot. Like, what if I wanted it to be like over here instead? Well, now I gotta redo my midtones and figure that out. That's not gonna do it. Delete. That's not gonna do it. Another one. Delete. That'll probably be okay. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Saturation 0.2. And then maybe I'll increase it a little bit. No, it's too much contrast. Maybe a bit too much saturation as well. 0.5, 0.45, 0.25, 0.35. There we go. I like that. That is a nice black. Maybe even less on here, honestly. 0.15. 0.1. There we go. And that's kind of what you have to do for dark colors. Again, every texture is case by case, but generally you'll know what to do based on what the base texture's colors are. Like how bright or how dark the base color is will determine what you have to do to get the results that you want.
Okay, for this next part, I'm going to do a quick recolor on the shirt and the hat. If you remember when we set this up, the hat and the shirt, as you can see, are different layers, which means you'd think I would have to tediously copy each handle and value from the color ramp, which is not true. So let me start out just by recoloring one, and then I'll show you how to copy the color ramp. I'm not going to do anything crazy though, I'm just going to do a basic color. So, instead of me copying every single value, like, copy this color, put it here, copy the position, and this one as well. So like, you could do that for the hat if you wanted those two to match. But that can be a little tedious sometimes. So what you can do instead is select the color ramp node you want to change, and then shift and select the color ramp node you want to copy from, and then search settings from active, shortcut to Shift C. You can do whatever you want, but when you do this, you'll get like this weird bug or whatever. All it basically does is disconnect your color ramp inputs and outputs, so just make sure you put those back, and you'll have your color ramp copied. And since I have a hat brim as well, I can do this for yours. I can do it for that. So that's now changed. So that's another little tip to save you some time, especially with more complicated color ramps where you have like maybe 4 different handles with precise positionings and everything. It does save a lot of time. So let's move on to actually exporting our textures. The setup we did at the beginning of the video makes this process pretty easy. All you have to do is select the image plane on this window, then select
the output texture that we made, come over to our render properties, scroll down, expand the bake menu, change combined to diffuse, and just leave color ticked. I always save before I do anything baking related or even rendering related. I do not trust this program to not crash. So I just make it a habit to save before you bake. And then all you do is hit the bake button and you'll get a little meter down here, and then here's your output texture. Just now realizing though, I didn't tell you what this was. This is a UV editor. It could be an image editor too. It doesn't matter. I prefer just to do UVs just in case I need to look at something. But from here, you can go image, save as, or you can just do Shift-Alt-S, and then you can save it. And then you can do the same for this other texture as well. Save. And then, now, I'm going to show you my personal preferred way to view recolors. So, I'm going to X this out real quick because that was from a previous example. I'm going to open up my Mario pack, and we're going to preview his model. I'm going to whoa, what was I trying to say? I'm going to disable pretty much the things that don't really matter here, like his hurt faces, just so I can get a more natural looking Mario. So what I recommend for previewing recolors is previewing stage lighting data. Something you have to be careful of when making recolors is not to make your brights too bright or your darks too dark. You kind of want to balance them in such a way where when they're put under stage lighting, they don't get blown out. So I always use one specific oh, I don't have it. Where is it? I always use one specific scene data. Not a fighter. So I recommend going to your stages file and finding stage Yoshi's Island, and coming inside of the file and finding the scene data. These files are lighting files. They contain data for stage lighting. Yep. I would just export the first one, put it somewhere where it's easily accessible. That was loud. And then you can get rid of it. So now come over here, change your animation section here to SCN for scene data, and then load that file, and then go ahead and preview it. So now you can see we have Yoshi's Island lighting applied, and it does make him quite bright. There is a reason why I use the Yoshi's Island data, and that is because it is a pure white light, and it's also probably the brightest light that Brawl has. So if your recolor looks good under Yoshi's Island lighting, chances are it looks good everywhere else. It's pretty nice. But from here though, we're going to go up to Tools, and we're going to go to Live Texture Editor, and we're going to enable it. My path is already set to the right one, but you just click this one, it'll bring up a file explorer. You go find where you saved your textures from Blender, and it'll automatically preview them. So if I change the color on like the overalls, for example, I'm going to try and do this quickly. Let's make them 0.025 saturate. Let's make them like brown instead. Do that. Okay, I suppose I don't have to do. Anyways, and if I rebake this texture, remember, the currently loaded texture is the black one. Save it, and it's brown now. So it's just a really quick way to load tweaked textures and compare previous attempts. I pretty much never make recolors without this tool. It's really handy. So the last thing I want to go over is how you might save what is essentially a PSD file, a project file of your recolors in case you need to come back to it and tweak it. The easiest way is probably just to save different blend files. Just have different blend files for different recolors. Honestly, compared to the next method I'm going to show you, it's a lot simpler, and it takes less work to set up. But if you want to have all your recolors in one blend, what I would do is you can select all these nodes, you can duplicate them, and then do Control G to group them together. You want to then take this last mix color node and take it to the group output, and you can press Tab to leave the group view, and then now you have your recolor in one node. And from here you can just label it like I'm just going to do example recolor because that's what it is. So it'll be named example recolor, so you can look at it, or you can give it its own color, so when you look at it, it's more obvious. Like this one's a brown, so I'll make the color like a brown. So if I change this back to default colors for the overalls, I can just plug this right into the diffuse and I get my brown color back. That's the alternative way. It saves space on your computer for sure, but when you have a lot of different colors, I guess it can be kind of hard to keep track of. I'm not really sure of any other ways you could save your recolors locally like that. But this is just how I would do it. This is how I used to do it before I just started saving blend files because I'm lazy.